This is Manchester. But how old is it? Do you know?
No idea.
13th century.
1600.
Well, that's not right. It is far older than that. Like York, Manchester owes its existence to the Romans. It is a Roman city, town. But unlike York, finding any evidence of that is pretty difficult. I actually asked about 18 people, and it was only Jack and that lovely couple that agreed to take part in the video in that way. So some of them looked terrified, as they wanted to run away, in fact. So thanks to Jack and the lovely couple for not being terrified in 2024. You see, Manchester destroyed its Roman legacy about 200 years ago. But there is one little bit left, and we're going to bring that to you this week exclusively. It's going to be difficult, and there are going to be many challenges to overcome, but we're going to do this thing. Where I am at the moment is very much where the English later re-established Manchester. The Romans got things going a little way south of here, down by the River Medlock, and that is where we're going today to find Manchester's Roman stone. What is it they say about Manchester? I'm mad for it. I think that's what they say. Right, before we get on to the Roman stuff, let's clear up this whole Manchester music scene thing. You've just got to forget about the Oasis and being mad for it. Salford Lads Club. And if it wasn't for an adverse reaction last week, I'd be singing now. Let's get out of the dark and into the light. Let's find Manchester's Roman stone. First step then is to locate the Roman fort and vicus. And I really wanted to sing that line here from the Smiths song, Still Ill, under the iron bridge we kissed. But considering the very negative response to my bright eyes, I won't. So what is this I hear you screaming at your devices? Manchester can't be a Roman city? It was made by the Industrial Revolution, surely, and is famous for Coronation Street, the Oasis, and the Smiths. But here's a bit of a clue to something different. Castlefield. Now, I wonder why they called it that. And this looks pretty promising. Maybe there's a bit more to see than we thought. A Roman shop, a Roman tavern, and a Roman house. Ditches and berms. And I'm actually walking on a Roman road. And what lays before me has exceeded my expectations. The actual gatehouse to the fort. Of course, sadly, it isn't the Roman gatehouse. It's a reconstruction dating back to the 1980s, and I never quite know what I make of this sort of thing, but it shows some interest, doesn't it, in the heritage of Manchester, something which I don't think we see that much of today. There was actually a bit of a fad for this, wasn't there, in the 80s? There's another one of these reconstructed gatehouses at South Shields. So this one, I think, was built between 84 and 86, following extensive archaeological excavations through the 60s, 70s, 80s, as the area was completely redeveloped and the remains of the fort were found. Now, this one is built on the robbed-out foundations of the stone fort of 200 AD. The first fort here was actually constructed around 79 AD, a timber one. So that is when Manchester properly began. Now, there is actually a tiny fragment of the original stone fort incorporated into this reconstruction. It's over there, I believe, about 3 slabs. Now, whether they're in situ or not, or whether they were put there, found in the excavation and put there, I don't know, but we'll have a quick look at those. Looking down from the battlements there, you can see the ditches and the berms and the Roman road leading off there, and then over in the far distance, you've got 3 reconstructed outlines of buildings that they found. A house, a shop and a tavern, I believe. So that's part of the vicus. So that is arguably the true start of Manchester there, the vicus. There was quite a significant population here. At its peak, they estimate 2,000 people living just outside the fort. And there was a lot of industrial stuff going on as well, with iron, making stuff for the troops holed up here in the fort. Where those 3 civilian buildings are marked out, they were originally sort of shacks where ironwork was happening, replaced by buildings with stone footings in around 120 AD. And the archaeological evidence suggests that they were still making stuff here up to about 350 AD. Of course, we're getting into the murky period then. As usual, there are different opinions about exactly what happened. We know the first fort was around 79 AD. It was probably renovated in 90 AD. Now, some archaeologists have said they think the fort was demolished in 124 AD when all the focus went up to Hadrian's Wall. But there's also evidence of a fire here in the 190s, just before they decided to finally build the fort in stone. The second complete rebuild, still timber, was around 160 AD, and some believe that was in response to the Brigantian uprising of 155 AD. We are in Brigantian territory here, although there was a sub-tribe in this area called the Satani. And just in case I got a little bit muddled up there, just to clarify, this useful sign shows us our first fort, AD 79, with that renovation around AD 90. Then we've got this sort of rebuild about 160. Then we've got the third rebuild, total rebuild, in stone this time in 200. The plaques here sort of suggest that it went out of use in the early 400s. I suspect it was more like the late 300s that happened. What we don't really know for sure is when the civilian settlement went out of use, and that's our more interesting thing today in terms of the origins of Manchester. Some of the archaeology has suggested it was fading away in around about 350, but we do believe that some Picts ravaged the town in something like about 426 AD, which suggests there was something left to ravage. I suppose it is quite useful in a way to get an impression of what the fort would have been like here in Roman Manchester. We'll be talking about the name in a bit. As I say, I have slightly mixed views about it, but what we can see is that in the 80s, there was a real interest in doing something about our heritage. And I don't think you can really say that today after 14 years of the unconservatives, and here specifically, banal Burnham. And note political balance achieved there. They're just all awful now, aren't they, our current crop of politicians? It doesn't matter which side they're on. None of them are actually interested in British heritage. They're all seduced by the profit from property development, glass and steel. That sort of stuff you can see over there. And then over here, beneath Burnham's beastly banalities, we've got a reconstructed section of the western wall and some granaries. In the interest of balance, I must point out that this is not all Andy Burnham's fault. The Tories are equally guilty for this glass and steel. I admit I am not a fan of the modern look of Manchester and the modern look of so many of our cities, which to me are homogenous. But I am a massive hypocrite because I love the Victorian architecture that has been swept away here. I don't love that it's been swept away. I miss it. But in reality, it was that Victorian architecture, the construction of that led to the destruction of our Roman fort, which had survived up to the early 1800s from the year 200 AD. The fort and vicus here had a long life. A span of 331 years separates the first occupation from the withdrawal of troops from Britain in 410 AD. Like looking back to 1693 from today. Roman Manchester was not a top-ranking town and the fort was not legionary. However, it sat at the junction of 7 roads, including the way north to the wall, and seems to have been a very civilised place. There have been no signs of an an amphitheatre found in Manchester. For family days out of mindless violence, one would have had to travel to Chester. In fact, in 1972, they discovered a very civilised gaming house, with finds indicating that the Romano-British Mancunians enjoyed a good old game of shove denarius. And in 1978, a Spanish word square was discovered, dating to 170 to 175 AD. It is the earliest known Christian relic in Britain. I know I said I had my doubts about this, but I suppose it is quite interesting, isn't it, to get an idea of what was here up until 200 years ago. We've understood the history of the fort. I know what you want to do is you want to see the actual node of the modern city of Manchester, the bit of the fort that remains, that are exclusive for this week. But before we do that, we need to sort out the name. It is not mentioned by Ptolemy in his list of Brigantian towns. The first time we see it in writing is in the second Antonine itinerary. And that has it as this. I'll give it a go. Mamucium. And that itinerary is actually the longest one in Britain. 501 miles from Richborough, where we have previously been to look at the first ever Roman ditch, and Birrens in Dumfries and Galloway. Mamucium was station 37. Some of you lot are going to say it should be Mamucium, aren't you? But the naming problems start with the 10th Antonine itinerary from Ravenglass. We've been there. To Whitchurch we haven't yet. And that gives it the name, the seductive name of Mancunium. Mancunium. Now that's some continuity, isn't it, if it's right? In the Ravenna cosmology, 7th century, we've got another problem. It's listed as Mantio. So what is it? I've got this great clipping from 1928 where you can see the debate raging over the name. Now, this particular chap seems to think that Mancunium actually applies to Stockport, and he's adamant that the correct name for the settlement and the fort here at Manchester was Mamucium. Mamucium. Of course, by the time the English arrived, they added Chester to it, as was their wont. And as you can see on the screen here, it still contains the M-A-M. It's not M-A-N, it's MAM there. And in the 14th century, it is still being spelt like this. It still has the MAM. It would have been nice if Mancunium had been the name, but I don't think it was. The persistence of that M-A-M up to the 14th century says it was Mamucium to me. The MAM bit is probably Welsh. It may be MAM as in mother, or it may be MAM as in mammary gland. Believe it or not, the fort here is sited on a raised bluff close to the river Medlock. So it may be breast-shaped hill. Well, a 1980s reconstruction is all well and good, but I know that what you lot want is you want to see the real deal. No, you want the real deal, like we normally do on this channel. So it's time to go undercover. You see, the problem is that nowadays, Manchester's Roman stone is buried in a private car park just round there. And I don't think they're going to be that keen on the idea of antiquarians. Here we go, into the car park. You can stop doing the black and white now. Thanks. Arch 95. The bedrock of Manchester in Arch 95. So what we're looking at here under Arch 95 is the sole in situ surviving fragment of the fort of 200 AD. Now, when they drove the railways and the canals through here, the fort was utterly destroyed. The walls were standing sort of 200 years ago. It was the railways and the canals that destroyed it. Now, when this particular railway line was being built, Lord Ellesmere urged them to do what they can to save what they can. And apparently what they could was this, just one lump of the Roman fort under this arch. We are looking at the oldest piece of masonry in Manchester by at least 1,000 years. This is the bedrock of Manchester. This is where Manchester began. Somewhat undignified, but let's see the glass as half full. At least there is something there. A.J.P. Taylor described this as possibly the most... No, I think he was more categoric about it. I think he said this was the most uninspiring Roman remain in Britain. Now, you'll note that the archway has been bricked up, and I suspect that dates to the period where, for decades, this was a timber yard, and they used to charge 10 bob to see the Roman wall. I've also got this quote from a journalist in 1999. Have a listen to it. Archaeological research has helped us to understand more about this period of Manchester's past, though what remains visible of the original fort is so stunningly unimpressive that one marvels less at it than at the historical sensitivity of those conservation-minded Victorians who felt it worthy of preservation. I think he's got the wrong end of the stick there. I think the Victorian construction workers did the absolute minimum to comply with Lord Ellesmere's request. This poor old stone has survived so much, as well as the Industrial Revolution, which wiped out the fort. There was a fire, I think 1889, a fire swept through the timber yards here. But there it is. It managed to cling on. I think it's undignified that it is here behind this awful metal fence. There's not even a plaque. I know it's never going to bring the tourists in. It's never going to be a cash cow as such, but surely we could have a plaque. I don't know if there's actually any substance to this, but I heard Martin Zero, when he was here a few years ago, saying that the turrets that we can see up there on the railway line were put there to sort of reflect the status of the fact that this railway line was sort of sat right on top of the Roman fort. I don't know if that's actually right, but it's quite nice if it is true. All of this is on top of the Roman fort, the start of Manchester. Anyhow, I'm really pleased I didn't get into any trouble with security. I was really nervous for some reason. But so if you ever come to Manchester, make sure you check out Manchester's Roman stone. It's in the car park in Collier Street. It's not just me that has a bit of a conflict about what's happened here. It's some of you lot as well, because I know that we have viewers who are nuts about railways and canals. The fort was actually destroyed by the construction of the Manchester Railway, plus the Bridgewater and Rochdale canals. I am a total hypocrite, you know, because if this hadn't been driven through my Roman fort, I would have quite liked it. Now, I know some of you clever clogs out there are probably going to say to me, why didn't I park in the car park where the Roman stone, Manchester Roman stone, is sited? Well, I tried to book online. It was fully booked. But when my first parking ticket ran out, I tried and I got in here, so perhaps I needn't have been so worried. Yeah, that is it. That is Manchester's Roman stone. Now, it's never going to be a top-selling tourist attraction, is it? And they're not going to get rid of that car park because everything has to be monetised in 2024, doesn't it? But wouldn't it be nice if they just put a reasonable bit of fence there and a plaque and kept it tidy? And then a walking tours, and I know they do them round there. You could go and have a look at it and understand that Manchester is Roman. Look what I've found. This is perfect to avoid the clumsy endings that we sometimes suffer from here. I'm going to walk off into Christmas. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week. Like and subscribe. That was meant to be the end.